Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for December 2021. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs. By sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is voices. Voice acting and first-person role-playing can enhance our RPG sessions. How much, if any, voice acting do we feature in our campaigns or encourage from our players? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have the Fireworks Factory.
Hello.
Kyle.
Hello, excited to be here.
Yeah. Brandon, listening in, probably will chime in a bit later. And special guest, a master of the voice. You may know him as Valravin. You may know him as Manix or Kalinar. It is the great Chris.
Oh, dear boy.
That's right. So this is going to be an interesting topic because we don't have a mechanical thing or a book thing to point to or a balance thing to discuss. It really just comes...
Is there anything even in the book about this?
So there actually is. I wasn't going to lead with this, but since you set me up, I actually flipped through the index of the Dungeon Master's Guide and decided, is there a voice one? There is not. But I looked under role playing, and on page 245 to 246, there is a note about using your voice when role-playing as NPCs, and it just says it's like 3 paragraphs. Borrow distinctive speech patterns from real life. Movies or television is a good place to start. Practice different voices and impersonations of famous people, then use voices to bring your NPCs to life. It talks about using different speech patterns and how, rich folk should talk in haughty drawls, pirates should say "our mateys," and all that good stuff. So very, very base level, basic stuff. But that's also kind of what RPGs are for, also. Very few groups are Critical Role. I need to stress that, especially as a group like ours, which does put ourselves out there as a online show that people can consume. My friends and I are not voice actors. Not professionally, anyway. And most people aren't. It's cool when they are and they can utilize all these very awesome voices and stick to that. But for the most part, I think we're all just amateurs, just doing our best and just doing it for the funsies. So in that light, I think voices can be very fun, but very much not for everyone. And in fact, I don't even think first-person role-playing is necessarily for everyone either.
What do you mean by that? Like saying I do something, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that?
Right, so you could, if you want to describe something and say, okay, Selenia sneaks behind this goblin and draws the dagger from her sheath, versus, okay, I sneak behind this goblin and draw the dagger from my sheath.
I feel like that's almost a whole other topic that we could talk about, because
the
difference between those two things, I'm fascinated by.
Yeah.
When we do one, when we do the other, I don't really know, but
it just kind of comes down to individual players, I think, in terms of what their comfort level is, how much they want to embody a character versus, do they see? It might just be an easier way of role playing. It's like, can I only role play if I role play in the third person? And even then, I guess you could still use voices if you're role-playing in the third person, because you could just be like, this is what they say, or this is what she says. Right. But I would imagine that you're almost... And I've done that, I apologize for talking too much, but I've done that too, where if a conversation comes up and somebody asks a question, I might get either mentally exhausted or just be like, I don't feel like role-playing this, and just say, oh yeah, and then this person says this. Like, oh yeah, they tell you that you need to go down the hall to the left. Instead of saying, yeah, you need to go down the hall to the left,
Right. Especially if it's been going on for a while. It's like, there's like a time limit. It's like, okay, this roleplay session's been going on for like 5 minutes. All right, this character's not gonna, drawl on with his descriptions anymore.
I very noticed a limitation of mine is that if I can do a decent amount of voices, and if I plan ahead of time and write down my opening dialogue and literally write down a sentence of like, here's how I want this voice to go, and then, practice it once or twice, and then usually do something different when I actually go live. I can nail it pretty well, but then once the follow-up questions begin and I have to start ad-libbing, then my part of the brain has to then shift to ad-libbing. I have to start coming up with these responses, and it's I know it is because I've felt myself do this. It's very difficult for me to maintain a lot of that level of voice work and also try and ad-lib everything. And I think you're a lot better at this than I am, Chris. In other words, it's hard for me to stay in character.
I pause a long time sometimes.
Yeah.
Like if people ask me a question that I want, that I'm still doing the voice of a character for, I will pause, and the pausing isn't, so that I can get back in the voice. The pausing is so that I can figure out what I can say, because I can't, like you're saying, it's very hard to both ad-lib in the moment and do the voice at the moment at the same time. So I have to kind of think about, okay, here's what I'm going to say, and then have that sort of in my head, and then speak with the voice. And that's the only way I can really do it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Kyle, tell me how you feel about doing voice work in your games.
I try, but like you said, it starts out well and then it goes downhill. If I have rehearsed, like you said, I have rehearsed a couple of parts, but it ends up any different character that I try to do, they all sound exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I should say in my head, they all sound phenomenal, but coming out, it's completely different. And because in my group, if I just start saying, okay, this person says this, I can tell they kind of start losing interest. But if I try to continue the voice, then they are listen to me just to mock me, but I still have their attention.
Right.
And so it works. So
right.
It's successful.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think voice work can make characters come to life in very fun ways and can make your players more engaged. And it works on the flip side, because if you accidentally give a random NPC a fun voice, then suddenly you've drawn a target on that character and your players want to engage with that character. Right. So I've kind of learned from that experience. Whereas if they want to talk to some random nobody that I don't want to follow up with, then I might not even do that. Just say like, oh yeah, this person just says this or something, not even try and do a voice for them. It's like, I don't even want my players to. So you can kind of almost direct your players to certain NPCs that way, if that's an option. Fireworks Factory, tell me about using voices in your game.
I love using voices in my game. There's basically 3 things that I massively enjoy using in my game. That's maps, minis, and voices.
Nice.
MMV.
Now, it's like I try to encourage my players to use voices, but I find most of the time it's really an excellent way to sort of break the ice, in a sense, to sort of allow the players who are sort of new to the group and just new to the game overall to really just sort of relax and encourage the idea of play in the game.
Mm. How what do you mean?
Well, the idea of the idea of play, the idea of sort of not worrying about whether or not people are going to judge you for trying to embody the character that you're playing. Embracing the character aspect, the silliness aspect, the fantasy aspect of the whole game concept.
That's an important point to make. Is not everybody can do voices, and most importantly, not everybody is comfortable with doing that, depending on the group situation and just their own basic comfort level. I mean, Chris, if you can't tell, was a theater kid, so he's pretty goddamn comfortable doing voices. I've grown accustomed to doing voices when I'm reading books to my kids, but that I understand that's also different for people that are going in front of other people and doing different voices too, and that comfort level is very important. And obviously, we don't want to shame anybody or make anybody feel bad for not being able to do that. And that kind of goes into that first person, third person difference too. Is there's no right or wrong way to do that. It can be, honestly, and to give it a good point of this, I was actually blown away, impressed when we started our current Rhyme campaign that basically every player was like, now we're at a comfort level where we can really do a specific voice for the player. And for a player to do a voice, that might be a whole nother discussion, because you're maintaining this voice for a way longer time than most DMs have to do any specific voice. Now, obviously, DMs, we cheat because we have, 4 voices, or if you're really good, maybe you've got like 10 voices, but, use the same ones and you just kind of,
pitch them up, pitch them down.
Yeah, exactly. Pitch. Thank you. That's the word I'm thinking of. Yeah, you change the cadence around a little bit, you've got your same little accents that you do your go-tos. And it might be, a random monster soliloquy or just some vendor NPC, but you can switch them around and it doesn't become as noticeable if you lose it. But a player, you are sticking to that accent for a while, so that becomes a different thing. Which my first big player, Kazan, I believe, I didn't do a voice for that one. It was just kind of my normal speaking voice.
Yeah.
But then the next one I did, Kaylin, had kind of a Spanish yeah. I was specifically going for like Inigo Montoya from Princess Bride kind of a thing. Yeah. And I
go back to that book a little bit. That's like it, right? Like that's how. I mean, I don't know if anybody else has different ways, but you copy something you've heard, right? Like that's the only way I even know how to do it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, you do. Yeah, whether it's somebody you know in real life or you watched movies of and TV and consumed different accents and heard these different voices speak, and you're like, yeah, I think I could do that, hopefully decently well. And you sit there and you practice it, and that's what shower time is for. I don't know what you people do in the shower, but I'm always talking to myself and muttering to myself. Good time to practice.
Well, that's voices. One of the great thing about using voices, the play aspect, is that you spend time rehearsing it and trying to develop this voice, and you actually do it, and it fails, but it's also entertaining. That's the wonderful aspect of it.
That's a hill a lot of folks have to get over. A lot of what makes people uncomfortable is the fact that they kind of tell themselves, like, if I do a voice, it will be bad. Yeah, it will, and that's fine. And that should not hold you back. Like half the time, the fun of the voice is that it's kind of bad.
Yeah,
that it just moves from Russian to like Spanish and back and forth. What was what I was trying to do? I was trying to do Irish, and it kept going into Russian at one point. I'm like, all right, I don't know what I'm doing.
But that's just the voice I'm doing, because
that's the voice.
Those cultures don't technically exist in this universe, so
that's right.
That's how this voice is. It's the combination of those two things.
Exactly.
Yeah, that you really have to get over that initial hill and just kind of just go with it, and I think people will generally respond to it, and it's almost like dancing, right? And dancing's even more of a like, oh, I can't do that. And if you do it, okay, it could be bad, and maybe dancing might actually make people feel bad if you're doing it badly. But the point is, once you get over it, you get confident, and people, I think, can appreciate the attempt. And I think it really does enhance role playing in some really fun ways. It can also do a fun way of what am I trying to say? When you have a character who sounds like they shouldn't sound based on what they look like, that can be a fun tool for voices to do. So it can work both ways, right? If you have a really tough, strong, powerful character and you come out with a really just sweet talking, like plain, innocuous voice, that can be really fun and funny. And for the same reason, you could have a really small, like just little bunny type character, and just all of a sudden this like nasty, raspy, evil voice come out, and you're just like, what the hell is going on? A great example of this is I'm playing the Pathfinder RPG right now, and one of the party members you get, slight spoiler, I guess, for Wrath of the Righteous, is a Hell Knight who are part of this like the embodiment of lawful evil, and they're just super, everything is the law, and just we murder our own people if they desert and everything, but we maintain order, and we wear this black armor, and he's a little fucking gnome, like thimbleweed ass motherfucker with like purple hair and big eyebrows, and you see him, and it's just hilarious. And then he comes out with this is how we're going to do it, Commander. And you're like, holy shit. And it's amazingly disarming when you hear this character speak. I thought that was a great example of the preconceptions I had when I saw the character portrait versus when I actually heard the character speak. And I was like, okay, this voice matches the personality, even though his body is clearly, he's still a gnome, but that's, not really who he is. Who he is this badass evil commander.
I feel like that happened in this current campaign recently with that Fox coming out with like the New York gangster voice.
Oh man.
And we were all immediately like like what is this thing? Like I feel like that's another case where what you were talking about earlier, where the Fox probably wasn't that important, but we all thought he was important because he had this very distinct voice.
I was specifically that Disney movie Enchanted that mixes like the live action with the animated stuff at one point. The like squirrel that she brings back into the live action is a very thick, like New York Bostonian type, which I'm sure I'm offending people from both cities that, how dare you? But to me, it's all the New England accent. I'm a Southern man, so it all sounds like New England accent to me. But that character had a very, very fucking thick accent, and that's kind of what I was going for there. Yeah, that ended up being a case of a almost nothing character, but because of that voice, that ended up being probably a longer role-playing session than it needed to be, because everybody was like, I gotta fucking talk to this character some more.
Yep.
What's a case of voices gone bad? Does anybody have an example of that?
I feel like when it's almost, if you play it right, it almost doesn't matter if they go bad. Eric, you mentioned this earlier, but I feel like this is a situation that comes up for me often too, where you in your head, the character's going to sound a certain way, and you practice it, and you're like, okay, here's how the character's going to sound. And then you get into the session and you start talking, and it's nothing like what you planned at all.
Because you got half a second, you're like, wait, what was it? Oh, fuck it, I'm going.
Yeah, my example was the cat from War for the Lost Plane. I was trying to do Ray Winstone. I was trying to do like gravelly voice, but then I realized that when I project, I can't gravel. Like when I'm talking at like regular volume, I can't get my voice to do that raspy, I've been smoking cigars my entire life voice. And so I never got his voice down, really. It was just sort of like whatever was happening in the moment is what he sounded like.
It's funny is if the character doesn't pop up for a couple sessions, nobody's going to remember what if the character's voice is slightly.
That's right.
Unless it was like extremely distinctive. But even then, I think you could get close to it. But nobody's going to be like, wait a minute, you don't sound exactly right.
Yep.
I don't remember if we gave you shit for that or not. We might have, but
oh yeah.
I think you brought it up.
Yeah, I kept getting mad at myself because I kept trying to bring every time I did it, I was like, nope, I can't do it. I can't sustain the gravel.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, you've been quiet. Tell me more about your voices.
Going off what Chris said, that the voice is not being, it's almost, you can't have a wrong one. When you're introducing a new character, and it's almost like using an accent or using a cadence that's different than your normal cadence is almost different from the written word and a picture. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you put a cadence and a voice or accent to something, you create a description that you would otherwise not be able to do in describing it, in just trying to describe it to them. And so, but then for your players, they create their own image of this person from your cadence, and then the feedback also helps create that, and then the back and forth. And so the really bad ones or the really good ones, those ones are the memorable because they're also creating this character.
I think that's absolutely the case. I feel like if you start doing a voice, whether it's cadence or accent or pitch or whatever, that creates more of a description that the characters will pay attention to than any like actual verbal description really can.
That's
and
actually,
I mean,
go ahead.
Essentially this is theater of their mind. And so you're trying to describe things and they're like, okay, I got to keep this in mind, but then when you hear it, they're like, okay, that's easy. And then then they create their own image.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say that's actually part of under the role playing part of the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it basically says the show don't tell, and that is a great example of show don't tell, which is using. I mean, I think it can be obviously helpful to give them a bare description of a character, but when you start doing that voice, that is showing them what this character sounds like, and that a voice can often point to a person's cultural background. It can point to their education level. It can point to their financial level. It can point to a lot of different things, or who they associate with. What kind of slang they use. If you're really getting to like the regional aspects of your fantasy world, like all of that can paint a very vivid picture of a character.
Yeah.
Brandon, are you around? I saw you took yourself.
I am.
Hey,
yes, yeah.
Excellent. Tell me about voices in your games.
Yeah, there's actually a lot that I want to talk about. You had mentioned some situations where it's gone bad. I don't think that there's any that it's gone bad, but I think the risk, right? It's a risk-reward situation of breaking verisimilitude. That if you can maintain the voice and keep it going, it helps build the story, just like we've been talking about. The risk being is that if when you break, that it breaks that verisimilitude. Sometimes that has a negative impact, but usually it's quick to pick back up, and everybody, you're going to have table talk and stuff like that breaks it anyway. Every time that I've had an opportunity to use a voice, I've tried to use a voice. So whether that's a couple games that I've been able to be a player and I'm the only one using a voice, even the DM's not using a voice, I realized that it still helped me find that character more, and that everybody else at the table enjoyed it, even when it wasn't perfect. And then
I have a quick follow up. Does anybody else then start going, okay, maybe I could do something?
Not once have they.
Really?
It's always been just me. So man. It's fine. Yeah, I don't mind that. But yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, right? There's been a handful of tables I've played at, and I've been a DM of like 3 different groups now. And like people that I work with on a regular basis in a fairly professional environment, and we have a work game on Thursday nights. So when I have to start using voices in front of a bunch of guys, sometimes that's a little awkward at first. And it's not that they refuse to, they just don't feel comfortable doing it. And you can tell. Yeah. And I don't put any pressure on them to do the voice, but I feel like it helps my game. I feel like it helps make the story thicker. I feel like it brings me enjoyment. And at the end of the day, if that's where I get my enjoyment out of running the game too, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know if I've experienced one where only one person at the table was doing a voice.
Yeah, it's a little.
I would
weird
think it'd be
sometimes,
infectious.
So
People
bad.
might get into it a little bit, but
I mean, I guess it depends. Here, what I'm curious about is how you even define a voice, because I feel like, like we talk about voice. I think a lot of times we're talking about accents.
Yeah.
But
yes,
half the time when I'm doing a voice, it's not necessarily an accent. It's just me with a personality trait that I don't have.
Right.
Like Mannix wasn't really an accent. Mannix was my voice if I was a smarmy asshole. That was sort of my. That's as far as I took it.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. Yeah. Not doesn't necessarily mean doing a thick, often exaggerated accent. It could just mean you're talking in a certain style, like you have certain traits, or whether you're doing like the more cynical, speech patterns, and it could mean like you're muttering occasionally, or maybe you just have an energetic voice and you're kind of higher pitched and you just get excited about everything, just something like that. It's not an accent. It just means you're, pitching your voice one way or the other.
But to that earlier point about that being a descriptive thing you're doing, I think that works really well. Like we were talking earlier about how most people only have 4 voices or 10 voices or whatever. But you can sort of like exponentially just multiply that by just throwing adjectives onto those 4 voices.
Yep.
Like, yeah, everybody's got their, gutter British and their proper British accents, right? Like that.
Why can everybody do like a baseline British? I don't understand.
I don't know. But if you would take either one of those, your gutter British or your proper British, and you just attach adjectives, now he's nervous gutter British. That's a different voice than angry gutter British, which is what they usually are. But but if you can
Guy Ritchie film,
exactly,
British.
Yeah. If you just throw adjectives on there and then pitch it up or down a little bit, suddenly that's a brand new voice, even though it's technically the same like accent you're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's voice acting 101 is just you could take your own voice and just include different cadences, include different personalities, and suddenly you've basically got a voice, and that one's probably better to maintain than trying to do a specific accent or regional dialect or something.
Something that hurts your throat to do.
And going back to what Brandon said, the cost reward. I had one voice that I had no more voice after the session, and my players the entire time was like, "Stop saying that. Stop using that voice. You're gonna lose your voice." And I lost my voice.
I for this last campaign, no joke, one of the characters, I'm gonna see if I can do it. One of the characters I had like on my short list was a Lizardfolk Ranger, I think. And I was going to actually do like I was going to talk like this the entire time.
Oh my goodness.
And as soon as I started doing it, after about 5 minutes of practicing, I'm like, holy shit, this hurts. Like, I cannot maintain this. This is gonna fall apart immediately.
See, that's an extreme voice that I would not use for a player character for that very reason, but I would do it for like a guard or something that players are going to interact with in one session. I think that would be an awesome thing to pull out, but I think that, for that reason, I think that would be way too much for a player character to try and maintain.
Yep.
That's just work, man. You try, because you've already got so much going on. You're like, oh.
Yeah.
and the bad thing is what happens then is you don't end up talking much.
Right, yeah. You're like, I can't do this that well, so.
Yeah. There was, I'm reading the Wings of Fire book series with my oldest, which is a fucking awesome book about dragons. We're on book like 14 right now.
Wow.
And I do voices for every single fucking character in that series. And there's been a couple where the chapter ended and I'm like, I can't speak because there were like 8 characters talking to each other and at least 2 of them were very difficult. It's been great practice for me. And every once in a while she'll be like, Daddy, that's not what so-and-so sounds like. I'm like, shit.
Well, I got confused.
I'm sorry.
I
haven't seen this character's voice in 5 books, so I don't quite recall what they sound like anymore. But I would recommend that being a good practice if you have somebody to read to.
Yeah, just read something and try to assign a voice to the lines.
Yep, do voices, and that can be a lot of fun. And
my kids usually start to ask, Dad, why are you using that voice? And I'm like, I'll use the same voice and keep talking to them and say, what are you talking about? And they'll be like, no, use your regular voice.
You're freaking me out, man.
Yeah, I want to read the book in this voice, and all the characters are in this voice.
That's the voice of the narrator, didn't you know?
Yeah, the narrator is a certain character. That would be way too much.
You mentioned practicing in the shower. I did most of mine while driving, and I would guess a lot of people do. I started using voice memos on my phone because I had a hard time keeping track of the cadence or the tone that I wanted to use for important characters. And I started using voice memos so that I could use it as a reference to go back to. And I found that using keywords, and we're going back to I'm saying accent, right? So when I say voice, because Chris made a great point, there is different ways that you can use the voice of a character. And upon reflection, there probably was 1 or 2 people that did use different words than they usually do to help provide the voice. So I guess I definitely mean accent.
Yeah.
But the main way that I would do it is use keywords, and those keywords would usually help draw me back into that accent so that I could switch accents quicker. And if I faded, I could usually say to myself that keyword and get back into the accent a little bit quicker.
All right, so are these words that in your head you can instantly grab onto that accent? Because I'm going to need some examples.
Yeah, so forgive me ahead of time.
No,
but
please.
I had like a dwarf that had just the old common gruffy voice, and it would have to be, all right then. And as long as I said, all right then I could kind of get back into that voice.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I started this chat with doing mine. Dear boy, it is like the code word to get before Rob. Like,
you can jump into it. Yeah.
That's how I jump in. Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't know if I've actually thought of it that way, but I probably do it unconsciously with certain phrases. But to actually remember keywords as the key to like getting back into that accent.
There's certain things that like almost they become like touchstones of the character voice that can always start there anyway.
When professionals do it, they do that exact same thing when they're trying to learn an accent. They get phrases, and those certain phrases, the letters in that accent are changed, and those are the ones that you have to manipulate the most. And so they'll find words that have the most manipulated sounds, and then you repeat them, and that's how you get into it.
Ah, that makes sense.
That does make sense. Yeah. So you automatically have to train your brain and your mouth basically to glom onto all the changes you need to make. It's fucking smart. I should look up more voice shit.
There was a character that I had to write out like a paragraph so that I could make sure that I was using. I was trying to do like a Cajun thing, and I realized that if instead of saying over there, if I said over there, like had to write out DER instead of THERE.
I have 1000% done that in my notes, which shameless plug, platinum patrons have access to. I have 1,000. If a character literally speaks in a very certain exaggerated way, I will absolutely write it down. What is that called? Phonetically. Like,
oh yeah,
to where it's like, the sehr good or something, and write down like literally ZER, try and write it down like that, so that when I'm looking at it, I will instantly switch into that voice and make it that much easier. Which is also probably why it's easier for me to do that initial, monologue spiel versus the ongoing conversation, because I don't have that written down.
Yeah, you're not looking at the it's spelled out for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've definitely done that, or versions of that. I don't know if I've ever actually intentionally misspelled a word, but I've definitely like thrown in words that I think sound good in the voice, so I can sort of touch on that, like "you're all right" or "dear boy" in the proper British voice, or a character that I want to sound stoic, so I don't put any contractions in their speech. As sort of like that same thing. It's almost a cue to be like, all right, this is how they talk. This is what they sound like.
Has anybody ever felt like a voice would be offensive?
Every one of them that I use.
I mean, there are certain voices. So, okay, that'll change the topic. But yes, I've absolutely, I feel like there are, oh God, yes, there are.
Again, safe space.
There are certain racial stereotypes that if you try to recreate them, they are just straight up offensive, right?
Yeah.
If you try to do the Breakfast at Tiffany's Chinese man voice, it's gonna sound offensive.
Yeah.
If you try to do what do you call it, like plantation slave voice, it's gonna sound offensive.
Yeah.
So you just stay away from those. You just stay away.
I think a general rule I've heard is that if somebody that's associated with that cultural heritage is at the table, would you still feel comfortable doing that voice? And if the answer is, I'm not sure, then probably err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes into that session one, set down the ground rules. What are we comfortable with? So
right.
That can be a tricky thing though, because voices do develop, at least for the DM point of view, because obviously players know what they're going to sound like hopefully from the get go, but the DM potentially could have all these different voices you want to jump into, and that can get to a tricky situation whenever you have a character, you have an idea, and you're like, oh, I want to be careful about skirting the edge of this accent, but not going too far into like any kind of exaggeration or stereotype or anything that's even perceived as racist. And that can be
a tricky thing.
It can be tricky, and I fear it keeps a lot of people away from doing voice work. And I'm hoping we can give people better advice about how to navigate that.
The one that always comes to mind in that is the Gungans from episode 1. Like, were they because I remember reading debates about that. Like, are they is that an offensive voice? They're doing the like Misa, they're talking in a way that could very easily be interpreted as racist caricature, but they're an alien race, so it's kind of a little. I don't know if that grants it a pass or not.
Yeah, that's true. That's
I would say as long as as long as the attempt is executed in a way that is not blatantly disrespectful to whatever it is that you're trying to perform as, then I think anything should be allowed in that regard.
Yeah, it's kind of like as long as you're thinking about it, as long as you're like actively thinking about it as you're doing it, you're probably not gonna step into offensive territory, just because I think most of us have a generally common sense
You'd hope so. Yeah, I would certainly hope so.
It's also
It
tough,
really
the difference between a group that is playing at a table at home.
Yeah,
And this doesn't make
Yes,
it
that's true.
right. I'm not
Yeah,
saying that any of this makes it right, but
Sure.
there is a difference between the ones that play at home versus you guys who are willing to put your voices out on the internet to where it's open to more criticism. And I think that once there was always some advice that I've been given that if you've had to think about it more than once, like the act of thinking about it, not that it's just sufficient enough, but usually the act of thinking about it and being cognizant of it, it usually means you're on the okay side.
yeah.
Right. It's like if you think about it, you're probably going to end up taking a step or two extra to sort of step away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, the good example for me is that the War for the Lost Plane, the sword, the Genosword.
Oh, Telluride.
Telluride started out when I was first doing it. I practiced it for a while, and then I said to myself, "I'm doing an offensive, homophobic voice."
Oh, interesting.
I am just doing like the hand flapping voice, the birdcage voice, basically. Yeah. And so I didn't really change it. I just tweaked it. He stayed sort of that effeminate sort of with those speech patterns. I just sort of tweaked it so that it wasn't in that same stereotype space anymore.
I think you did a good job. I mean, I didn't think it was offensive when I heard it, but I think you're right. It is a line, and it also points to the character themselves. I think that you're portraying, and unfortunately, the voice goes with the character. But like, is that character also going to be a stereotype? And is the voice reinforcing that, or is that voice just point to their specific area they're from, or how does the whole character come together, basically? Right. Is that the only character who's got that voice, or are there other characters with similar sounding voices, because then it gets a little more interesting. Yeah, it's a tricky question. There's a couple of hard rules, and mostly it's a lot of just session zeros can help with that, but the DM obviously has a harder session zero can get you around a lot of player voice questions and criticisms, but with the DM, you're not going to have all your voices right at the beginning, so you're going to have to make these judgment calls as you progress, and hopefully if you're... I would
say that... Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just saying, like, I feel like it shouldn't scare anyone either, like, because if you step over the line and one of your players lets you know it, then fine. That's the system working as intended, If someone tells you, like, hey, the voice you're doing, I'm not comfortable with, for whatever reason, then you can back off.
That's very true.
That's totally valid.
That goes another topic I've been having in the DM Roundtable, by the way, to safety tools, which is not something we've formally actually developed, which is bad for my group, because we should set a good example. But for a lot of groups that don't play with their lifelong best friends,
right? People who've known each other since the fucking second grade.
Yeah. where you can have those moments where you put up a card or make an anonymous note or whatever that's just like, hey, I'm not 100% comfortable with this. You're not putting down your paper and storming out the door. You're just saying, like, maybe ease off or something, and then hopefully if the DM isn't an asshole, they can be like, okay, I'll change it, and maybe after the fact we can...
We've got that though, Eric. I've seen it happen in our group.
Oh, please.
But we just joke about it. Somebody will go... Reese has done this to me a number of times. Where like I'll start making a joke, and Reese will say something that sort of lets me like, all right, I'm taking this too far. I gotta back up a little bit.
All right, or something.
That's exactly it. Someone will be like, all right, that's enough, or something like that.
That's
like
true.
They're joking.
It's informal,
but it's also
but
a cue.
It's
also like you're all right.
But I'm saying that's why we don't have those formal. There literally are formal systems that games have developed officially or unofficially to where you can make those judgment calls. We just kind of pick up on each other's cues about, okay, we need to back off, or we've taken this joke too far, or whatever else. So but that is a separate topic. I do have safety tools as a DM roundtable topic that I do plan on discussing. So
it is also the job of us as DMs to be reading the room on a fairly regular basis.
Yes.
That is true.
So I think as long as we're doing that, and not necessarily checking in with people, that's always important, but just reading the room has a big impact, and you can catch it.
Yep.
Very true. Yeah, just try to use good judgment calls, basically, based on that. Hopefully, as a DM, you've got good judgment calls for all your role-playing characters, and voices are as much part of the character as anything else. Is it time for closing thoughts for our voice work in our campaigns, or that we encourage from our players? Let's start with Kyle.
Voices can be fun. Piecemeal them slowly if you want. Or just the very basic, change your vocabulary.
What is your? I'm gonna ask this of everyone as they go around. What is your favorite go-to voice?
I guess it would be just an absolute butchering of the Irish.
Can I get an example?
Oh goodness.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh yeah. Well, me boy. It's not very good, but it's just really breathy.
I like it. That's great.
Great.
That's awesome.
Great.
Excellent. Fireworks Factory, give me your closing thoughts on voices.
I would say voices are good. Voices are great. I would say my biggest takeaway or recommendation in terms of using voices at the table is something Al Pacino once said was, "Don't overdo it."
Excellent. I'll count that as your voice work as well.
Oh, okay, cool.
Brandon, give me your closing thoughts on voices.
Yeah, definitely use them, but don't feel obligated to it. And it will improve your experience. It'll make you have more fun. Even the times that you mess up, you'll really enjoy that. As far as go-to voice, outside of that gruff one, yes, I like to speak with Russian accent very often.
That's a good one. That's I'm jealous.
that was honestly another option for me for this campaign. I was going to play what are they called?
Voltoroven have Russian accent. It's very good.
Amazing.
Yeah, I tried doing that with the Dwerger, and I fell off very, very quickly. Chris, your closing thoughts on voices?
Yeah, I think they're great. Like we said, they're an awesome way to sort of give your character a lot more personality than a verbal description could probably ever do. To tell you more players about what's going on with that character through just how you're voicing them. And I'd say just don't be afraid of it, and don't think that you have to be good at it. Don't think you have to master an accent or nail it 100% before you start. Just change your voice a bit, pitch it up, pitch it down, make your voice sound angry, make your voice sound nervous, and there you go, you've started.
What's your favorite go-to voice?
Oh, I don't have a go-to voice.
No, you're many facets.
I'm a man of variety, but I'll call back one of the ones that people seem to like quite a bit that I had a lot of fun doing. Sneakbacks, very happy to be here. Make a sneakbacks, won't say goodbye.
Very good. I basically copied that for Ballista. I think a lot of DMs can pull out that goblin voice in a lot of ways. Yeah,
I guess that is a go-to then, isn't it?
It is kind of a go-to. I mean, I don't want to belittle, but it's such a good one that you basically pitch your regular voice up and dumb down your dialect in equal measure.
You got a solid goblin.
And you've got a solid goblin voice. Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm a big fan of using voices. I think for a DM, it's an important part of their toolkit. And I think a lot of what we've said here is just go for it. Don't, just try it. Honestly, I think your players will respond to it really well. If, you have second misgivings or you feel like I can only do half this accent, then do that. You don't have to do these thick, perfect accents for these characters, because these characters aren't really Russian or Irish or Spanish or whatever other accents, or Brooklyn, or San Francisco, or whatever. They're just their own culture, and it's you craft these cultures. That's really what voices are. It's just a culmination of all this cultural and regional, and it can point to all these different socioeconomic levels. It gets really interesting, or it can just be fun, which is very important. All right.
If nothing else, it'll end up being funny.
Exactly, yes. And who doesn't like a nice pirate voice? One of my favorite ones to pull out which I used for my loved Havelock, the cleric of the Tempest domain. I love a good pirate voice.
You like that one so much that sometimes other voices turn into
that
pirate
is 100%
voices.
true. That's why it's my go-to voice.
That's right.
All right. Thank you to the Fireworks Factory, Kyle, Brandon, and special guest Chris for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. And thank you to all the wonderful patrons. Shout out to Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Christopher, Thomas, Adam, Stan, Nathan, Alex, Cam, William, I'm Loud, and Al. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Sklenia, Blood Angel, Veronis, Baboon, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, James, and Kyle. I am Eric, and I hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Thanks for
Thank you. This was a blast.
Yeah.